My own son looked at me, wrinkled his nose, and said words I will never forget. "You smell like poverty. Get out of my house." So I did. But before I left, I placed a small box on the marble table. Inside was a receipt he had never seen. And by the time he understood what it meant, the villa was already gone. I never raised my son to be cruel. I raised him to survive. When his father died, there was no safety net. No inheritance waiting quietly in the background. Just bills, responsibilities, and a child who needed more than I could afford. I worked jobs that didn't come with pride. I skipped meals so he wouldn't notice money was tight. I learned how to smile in public while calculating numbers in my head. When he got sick, everything changed. The doctor spoke carefully, the way they do when they're about to say something expensive. The surgery was urgent, life-saving, and far beyond what I had. I sold everything that wasn't nailed down. Then I sold things that were. I emptied accounts meant for my retirement. I signed papers I barely understood. I took loans that followed me for decades. I didn't hesitate, because that's what parents do. He survived. He grew up healthy, brilliant, ambitious. He learned the language of success quickly, better than I ever did. Degrees, connections, promotions. He built a life that looked impressive from the outside. And somewhere along the way, he learned to be embarrassed of where he came from. The day he invited me to see his new villa, I wore my best clothes. They weren't new, but they were clean. I practiced what I would say, how proud I was, how happy I felt for him. The villa was stunning. White floors, glass walls, a view that felt unreal. He walked ahead of me, talking fast, distracted, already living inside his next achievement. Then he stopped. He looked at me, really looked. And his expression hardened. "You can't stay here," he said flatly. I thought he was joking. Then he added, almost casually, "You smell like poverty. This place has standards." The words landed heavier than any slap ever could. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him of anything. I simply nodded. I walked to the table, placed the small box down gently, and left. Inside that box was a single document, a receipt, the original payment confirmation for his surgery, the one I paid for by sacrificing my future. Every saving, every plan, every dream of rest. And attached to it was something else. The property deed. The villa was never in his name. It was in mine. I bought it quietly years earlier when he was just starting out. I wanted him to have a place that felt permanent. Something solid. Something safe. I never told him. I wanted his success to feel earned, not gifted. As I walked away that day, I made one call. By the time he opened the box and started reading, the paperwork was already moving. He called me. Once. Twice. Again and again. I didn't answer. Because some lessons only land when silence delivers them. The villa sold quickly. Luxury always does. I used part of the money to clear my remaining debts. I invested the rest into something simple and quiet. A life that didn't need to impress anyone. Weeks later, he finally found me. He didn't apologize right away. He tried explanations first. Stress. Pressure. Words he thought would soften what he had done. They didn't. I listened calmly. Then I said something I had never said to him before. "I didn't raise you to forget who carried you when you couldn't walk." That was the moment his confidence broke. Not because he lost a house, but because he realized what it had cost me to give him everything he thought he earned alone. People think wealth teaches power. Doesn't. It reveals character. I didn't take the villa to punish him. I sold it to remind him that success without gratitude is just another form of poverty. And that's the truth he learned too late. You can insult where you come from. You can deny the hands that lifted you. But one day you will stand alone and realize the foundation you mocked was the only reason you ever stood tall. That was the last lesson I owed him, and I paid it in full. The silence after I sold the villa was louder than the insult itself. For days my phone didn't ring. No anger, no apologies, just absence. That's when I knew the reality had finally reached him. People don't react immediately when their world collapses. First they deny it. Then they search for someone else to blame. Only later, much later, does understanding arrive. I went back to a smaller place. Nothing fancy. A quiet neighborhood where no one cared what car you drove or what shoes you wore. The kind of place where mornings smell like coffee instead of ambition. For the first time in decades, my future felt mine. No debt hanging over my head. No fear of getting sick again. No calculations running in the background of every decision. I slept deeply. Meanwhile, my son struggled in ways money couldn't fix. I heard about it through others. How he tried to rent a similar place but couldn't stand the idea of temporary. How he kept saying, "It doesn't feel like home." How the people around him, friends who admired success, not sacrifice, didn't know what to say when the illusion cracked. A house looks permanent until you learn it isn't yours. Weeks later, he finally showed up. Not angry, not proud, just tired. He stood at my door longer than necessary before knocking. When I opened it, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. He didn't step inside right away. "I didn't know," he said quietly. That sentence carries a lot of weight when it comes too late. "I didn't know you paid for everything," he continued. "The surgery, the house, all of it." I nodded. "I never wanted you to know," I said. "I wanted you to grow strong, not dependent." He swallowed hard. "I thought success meant leaving all that behind," he admitted. "I thought poverty was something to escape." I looked at him for a long moment before replying. "Poverty isn't money," I said. "It's forgetting who stood with you when you had nothing." That was when he finally cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the kind of quiet crying that happens when pride finally runs out of places to hide. He apologized then, not with speeches, not with excuses, just words that didn't try to soften the truth. "I was ashamed," he said, "and I shouldn't have been." I didn't forgive him immediately. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a process. But I let him sit. I let him talk. I let him listen. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about repair. Over time, things changed, not overnight, not perfectly. He started asking questions he'd never asked before. About my past. About the jobs I worked. About the years he never noticed because he was busy surviving without realizing someone else was carrying the weight. He began visiting more often. Not to show off. Not to complain. Just to be present. I never gave the villa back. That chapter was closed. But I gave him something else. Perspective. The kind you can't buy. The kind you only earn by losing something you thought defined you. Today he lives more simply. He works just as hard, but with humility he didn't have before. When he talks about success now, he talks about responsibility instead of image. And when he introduces me to people, he says something he never said before. "This is my mother. Everything I am started with her." That's when I knew the lesson had finally landed. I didn't sell the villa to teach him about money. I sold it to teach him about value. Because one day luxury fades, titles change, addresses disappear. But respect? Respect is the only inheritance that truly lasts. And that's the one thing I was never willing to let him lose forever. Time did what lectures never could. Slowed him down. After the villa was gone and the illusion cracked, my son had to face something he had avoided his entire adult life. Ordinary days. No staff. No marble floors. No quiet reassurance that success would always cushion his mistakes. First, he hated it. He complained about small apartments feeling temporary, about how silence felt different when it wasn't wrapped in luxury, about how people treated him differently when his address changed. I listened. I didn't interrupt, because struggle teaches better when it's allowed to speak. One evening, he asked me something unexpected. "How did you do it?" he said. "All those years. Alone." I thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't think of it as doing something heroic," I said. "I thought of it as staying." That answer stayed with him. I could tell. He began to notice things he once overlooked. The cost of groceries. The patience required for paperwork. The way time stretches when you don't have shortcuts. These weren't punishments. They were realities. Slowly, his language changed. He stopped saying my place and started saying where I live. He stopped talking about image and started talking about stability. He stopped chasing applause and started asking about impact. One day, he brought me a small envelope. Inside was a copy of the surgery receipt. Not the original, mine was still tucked safely away, but a copy he'd tracked down himself. "I needed to see it again," he said. "Not as a number, as a decision." That was when I knew something fundamental had shifted. Because gratitude isn't loud. It's attentive. He began checking in without needing a reason. Sometimes just to ask how my day was. Sometimes to sit quietly, scrolling on his phone while I read nearby. Presence replaced performance. I didn't rush forgiveness. Trust rebuilds the way bone heals. Slowly, unevenly, but stronger where it once broke. Months later, he told me he'd turned down a promotion. I raised an eyebrow. "It came with strings," he explained. "The kind that pull you away from yourself." That sentence told me everything. He had learned the difference between success and self-erasure. We never spoke about the insult again. Not because it didn't matter, but because it had already done its work. It had exposed something fragile in him, something that needed breaking before it could be rebuilt properly. One afternoon, while walking past a luxury complex, he stopped. "That used to be my dream," he admitted. "And now?" I asked. He smiled quietly. "Now I just want something I don't have to be ashamed of." That was the moment I finally let go of the anger I didn't know I was still carrying. Not because he earned forgiveness, but because he earned understanding. People think lessons have to hurt forever to matter. They don't. They just have to land. I never bought another villa. I never chased prestige. I invested in peace. And my son, my once proud, once careless son, learned something no school or salary could teach him. That wealth isn't what separates you from your past. It's what allows you to honor it. Now, when he speaks to others about ambition, he says something that always makes me look away so he won't see my eyes shine. Build something you don't have to step on people to stand inside. That's when I know the story truly continued. Not as punishment, not as revenge, but as growth. The villa was sold, but something far more valuable was returned: respect, humility, and a bond that, once nearly broken by pride, was rebuilt on truth. That's not just an ending. That's inheritance done right. What changed most wasn't his lifestyle. It was his posture. He no longer walked into rooms expecting them to adjust around him. He waited. He listened. He noticed who was doing the invisible work: the assistants, the cleaners, the people he once looked past without realizing they were holding everything together. That awareness didn't make him smaller. It made him grounded. One afternoon, we sat together on a park bench watching people pass by. No phones, no urgency, just time moving at its own pace. He broke the silence first. "I used to think leaving my past behind was strength," he said. "Now I realize I was just running from gratitude." I didn't correct him. I didn't praise him either. Growth doesn't need applause. He started volunteering at a local clinic on weekends. Nothing glamorous. Paperwork, waiting rooms, conversations with people who reminded him uncomfortably of where he came from. The first few weeks drained him. Later, they steadied him. One evening, he admitted something he'd never said out loud before. "I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that if I acknowledged what you sacrificed, I'd have to admit I didn't do it alone." I looked at him gently. "No one ever does," I replied. That sentence seemed to lift a weight off his shoulders. Months passed, and with them came a quieter confidence. He stopped measuring himself against others, stopped chasing spaces that demanded he become someone else to belong. He rented a modest place near his work, decorated it slowly, intentionally. Every choice felt considered, not performative. He invited me over one evening. There was no marble table, no sweeping view, just a small dining area, warm light, and food he'd cooked himself. "This feels like mine," he said, almost surprised. I smiled. That was the point. We never spoke about the villa again. Not because it was forbidden, but because it no longer represented anything either of us needed. It had served its purpose. It had revealed what it needed to reveal. Sometimes people think consequences are about loss. They're not. They're about recalibration. I didn't take the villa to hurt my son. I took it to interrupt a direction that would have cost him something far more expensive later: his ability to respect himself. Now, when people talk about success around him, he listens differently. He asks questions that aren't about profit but about cost. Cost to family, cost to integrity, cost to sleep. And when he speaks, people listen, not because he's impressive but because he's honest. That's a rare currency. As for me, I live simply, comfortably, without the constant feeling of owing the world an explanation. My future is quiet in the best way, planned but not tense, secure but not guarded. Sometimes late in the evening, my son calls just to check in, not to ask for advice, not to prove anything, just to connect. That's how I know the story didn't end with a sale. It continued with understanding. The villa was an asset. The surgery was a sacrifice. But what came after? That was a legacy. One built not on luxury, but on remembering who carried you when you couldn't carry yourself. And that's the kind of inheritance that never depreciates. There was a time when I thought raising a child was about giving them opportunities. I was wrong. It's about teaching them how to recognize what really matters once opportunities arrive. After everything changed, my son didn't become perfect. He became aware. And awareness is harder than success. Success flatters you. Awareness humbles you. He started noticing how often people used money to cover discomfort. How luxury softened conversations that needed honesty. How status gave people permission to be careless with words. One night after a long day, he said something quietly that stayed with me. I don't think I ever learned how to say thank you properly. I didn't rush to comfort him. Some realizations need space. Instead, I asked, "What do you think it means?" He thought for a long moment. "I think it means remembering," he said finally. "Not just the result, but the cost." That was the shift. From outcome to origin. He began asking about my past in ways he never had before. Not just the big sacrifices, but the small ones, the years I pretended I wasn't tired, the times I chose stability over dignity, the moments I smiled so he wouldn't worry. Listening to those stories unsettled him. Not because they were tragic, because they were quiet. People expect suffering to be loud. They don't expect it to look like routine. One afternoon, he asked to see the original surgery receipt again. This time he didn't look at the number. He traced the date with his finger. "I was joking with my friends that day," he said softly. "I didn't know you were signing away your future." I nodded. "I didn't want you to know," I replied. "Children shouldn't grow up carrying their parents' debts." He swallowed hard. That was the moment I knew something inside him had settled permanently. Not guilt, responsibility. Months later, he made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He turned down an investment that promised fast growth but required cutting corners. People told him he was being emotional, short-sighted. He didn't argue. He simply said, "I know what fast growth costs." That sentence told me the lesson had rooted itself. We didn't become a picture-perfect family overnight. There were awkward silences, missed calls, moments where old habits almost resurfaced. But something was different. There was no contempt anymore. Contempt is what breaks things beyond repair. Respect rebuilds slowly, but it rebuilds deep. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, he paused and said something that finally closed the circle for me. "I used to think wealth was about distance," he said. "Distance from struggle. Distance from where you start." He looked at me. "Now I think real wealth is staying connected without being ashamed." That was it. Not an apology. Not a promise. Understanding. The villa was gone. The money had moved on. But what remained was something no property could ever guarantee. A son who finally saw his parent as a person. And a parent who no longer had to prove her worth through sacrifice. Now, when people hear parts of this story, they focus on the dramatic moment, the insult, the box, the sale. They miss the truth. The real transformation didn't happen when the villa was sold. It happened after, when pride had nowhere left to hide. I didn't take something from my son. I gave him back something he didn't realize he'd lost. Perspective. And in return, I received something far more valuable than luxury or gratitude. Peace. The kind that comes when love is no longer conditional on success. The kind that stays. And that's how the story keeps going. Not as a lesson shouted from a stage, but as a quiet correction that lasts a lifetime. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what you leave behind. It's what you teach someone to carry forward correctly. There was a quiet confidence in him now that I hadn't seen before. Not the loud kind that announces itself. The steady kind that doesn't need validation. He stopped trying to prove he belonged in rooms full of power. Instead, he chose rooms where conversations mattered more than appearances. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, people noticed, not because of what he owned, but because of what he understood. One day he asked me to walk with him. No agenda, no destination, just a walk. As we moved through the neighborhood, he pointed out small things he'd never noticed before. A shop owner greeting regulars by name. A mechanic who waved at everyone passing by. Kids playing without worrying who lived in which house. "This feels real," he said. I smiled because that word real had taken him years to find. He admitted something then, something raw. "I used to think you stayed small because you didn't dream big," he said. "Now I realize you stayed small so I could grow." That sentence didn't need a reply. Some truths don't. From that day on, he became protective in a different way. Not controlling. Not defensive. Thoughtful. He checked details. He asked questions. He planned with patience instead of urgency. He started saving not just money but time. Time with people who mattered. Time to sit with discomfort instead of buying his way out of it. One evening, he brought home a framed copy of something simple. The surgery receipt. Not as a reminder of debt, but as a reminder of choice. "I want to remember where my life actually turned," he said. That was when I finally felt the weight lift from my own shoulders. Because parents don't want repayment. They want recognition. Years later, people would still assume he grew up privileged. They'd see confidence, stability, clarity, and assume it came easily. He never corrected them. But sometimes, when the moment was right, he would say quietly, "My success didn't start with money. It started with someone choosing me over their future." Those words traveled farther than any address ever had. As for me, I learned something too. That letting go doesn't mean losing. It means trusting the lesson to do its work. I didn't regret selling the villa. I didn't regret the silence. I didn't regret the boundary. Because what grew in that space was stronger than anything money could secure. Respect. Humility. Connection. Now, when I look at my son, I don't see the boy who once turned his back on me. I see a man who learned painfully honestly that where you come from is not a stain to erase. It's a foundation. And the day he understood that, the story stopped being about loss. It became about alignment. Between past and present. Between sacrifice and gratitude. Between love and responsibility. That's how it continues. Not with luxury. Not with resentment, but with a quiet understanding that lasts far longer than any villa ever could. And that, in the end, was worth everything. The days settled into something steady after that. Not exciting, not dramatic, just honest. My son began to live in a way that didn't require explanation. He didn't announce changes. He embodied them. He showed up on time. He followed through. He learned to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. And slowly, the people around him adjusted, not to his status but to his consistency. Consistency is powerful that way. One afternoon, he told me he'd started mentoring a younger colleague. Not officially. No program. Just coffee after work, conversations about mistakes, reminders that shortcuts always send the bill later. "I see myself in him," he admitted, "and I don't want him learning the hard way." I nodded. That's how cycles break. Not with speeches but with intervention. He asked me once if I ever resented him. I didn't answer right away. Resentment is a heavy word. It implies something unresolved. "I resented the silence," I said finally. "Not you. The silence that made it easy for you to forget." He looked down, absorbing that. I won't be silent again, he said. And he wasn't. Not loudly. Not defensively. He spoke up when people crossed lines. He corrected jokes that mocked struggle. He stopped laughing along with things that once made him feel superior. Those moments matter more than apologies. Time passed. Seasons changed. His life became simpler but fuller. Mine became quieter but lighter. We didn't try to recreate what we'd lost. We built something different, something based on truth instead of expectation. One evening, as we were clearing dishes, he paused and said something that closed the last open door in my chest. I used to think loving someone meant staying ahead of them, he said. Now I think it means standing beside them, even when it's uncomfortable. That was it. No more lessons needed. People often think the most powerful moment in this story is the insult, or the box, or the sale. It isn't. The most powerful moment is what came after. When no one was watching, when no one was impressed, when change had to happen without applause. That's where real character shows up. I never bought another villa. I never chased luxury again. I invested in peace and health, in mornings that didn't start with dread. I learned to enjoy having enough. And my son learned that enough is not a downgrade. It's freedom. Now when he hugs me goodbye, there's no rush, no tension, no need to prove anything, just presence. That's how I know the story truly moved forward. Not because something was taken away, but because something essential was finally returned. Respect, awareness, and a love that no longer needed money to feel real. And that's where it rests. Not as a warning, not as revenge, but as a reminder. You can lose a house and still keep your foundation. But if you lose respect, no luxury in the world will ever feel like home. What surprised me most was how ordinary happiness became. Not flashy, not loud, just reliable. Mornings had a rhythm now. Coffee, sunlight, conversations that didn't revolve around proving anything. My son stopped talking about where he was going and started paying attention to where he already stood. That shift changes a person. He began repairing relationships he had neglected. Not dramatically, not all at once, but carefully. One apology at a time. One honest conversation. One acknowledgement of wrong timing, wrong words, wrong silence. Some people accepted it. Some didn't. He learned to live with both. That was new too. One day he asked me something I never expected. Do you think I would have learned this without losing the villa? I didn't answer immediately. Lessons don't always need loss, but some people only hear truth when the noise stops. I don't know, I said honestly, but I know you learned it when it mattered. He nodded. That answer was enough. He stopped defining himself by success stories. He started defining himself by what he could stand behind. He made decisions slower now, asked different questions. Questions about impact instead of image. Changed his friendships. Some drifted away. Others deepened. That's what growth does. It reorganizes your circle without asking permission. As for me, I stopped measuring my life by how much I had given up. Sacrifice no longer felt like loss. It felt like investment, one that finally showed its return. I used part of the money from the villa to secure my health long-term. Another part went into quiet causes that never carried my name. No recognition, no plaques, just impact. Sometimes my son would notice and ask why I never told anyone. I'd smile and say, because the work doesn't need witnesses to matter. That idea stayed with him. Years later, he repeated it to someone else. I heard it secondhand and laughed quietly to myself. That's how you know lessons have traveled far enough, when they're no longer traced back to you. Our relationship settled into something honest and unforced. No guilt, no superiority, just mutual respect. We didn't need to agree on everything. We didn't need to pretend the past never happened. We acknowledged it and then we chose differently. That's what healed it. People sometimes assume stories like this are about punishment. They're not. They're about rebalancing. When someone forgets where they came from, life has a way of reminding them, sometimes gently, sometimes sharply. What matters is what they do after the reminder. My son chose humility, and I chose peace. Now, when I walk past places that once symbolized success, they don't pull at me anymore. I see them for what they are, temporary structures built to impress people who are also passing through. Home, I learned, isn't marble or glass or view. Home is where you don't have to shrink or perform. And respect? Respect is what turns sacrifice into legacy. The villa is gone. The money moved on. But something far stronger remained. A son who finally understood the cost of love. And a parent who no longer had to prove it. That's where the story rests. Not in luxury, not in regret, but in quiet understanding, the kind that lasts long after everything else is sold. The calm didn't make life smaller. It made it clearer. When the noise finally left, no more status comparisons, no more measuring worth in square footage, I started noticing how much energy I had been wasting just trying to keep up. Keep up with expectations that were never mine. Keep up with an image that didn't even belong to the people chasing it. My son noticed it too. He started waking up earlier, not to grind, not to prove anything, but to walk. Just walk. Some mornings he invited me along. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Silence between us had changed. It no longer carried blame. It carried comfort. One morning, as we watched the city wake up, he said something simple. I used to think I was ahead of everyone. He paused. I was just far away. That sentence stayed with me. Distance can look like progress if you don't know what you're running from. He became more intentional with his money after that. Not fearful. Intentional. He asked questions before investing. He wanted to know who benefited, who got displaced, who paid the hidden cost. Those questions slowed things down, but they also made his choices solid. People noticed. Not everyone liked it. Some called him soft. Some said he'd lost his edge. He didn't argue. Edges cut both ways. I watched him learn something I never had the language to teach him growing up. That dignity isn't something you earn after success. It's something you carry into it. Our conversations changed. They weren't about achievement anymore. They were about alignment. About whether a decision felt clean. About whether he could explain it to himself without excuses. That's a hard standard, but it's a peaceful one. As for me, I stopped being defined by what I had endured. People love to frame parents like me as martyrs, heroes of sacrifice, stories meant to inspire pity or awe. I rejected that narrative. I wasn't heroic. I was practical. I made choices with the information I had, and I lived with their consequences. That doesn't make me special. It makes me honest. The money from the villa continued to do quiet work. Not dramatic. Not visible. It fixed what needed fixing. Secured what needed securing. The rest I let go of. Letting go felt strange at first. Then it felt freeing. I didn't need proof anymore. Not of love. Not of sacrifice. Not of worth. Those things had already paid their dues. My son eventually stopped introducing me with explanations. He didn't say what I'd done for him or what I'd given up. He just said my name. That was enough. There's a moment in every long story where the lesson stops being the focus and life resumes center stage, where growth becomes background noise instead of the main event. That's where we are now. We share meals. We argue sometimes. We disagree about small things that don't threaten the foundation anymore. The relationship is no longer fragile. It's flexible. That's stronger. If you asked me now whether I regret anything, I'd tell you the truth. I regret the years I thought love had to be invisible to be real. I regret the times I stayed quiet to keep peace that wasn't actually peaceful. But I don't regret the boundary. I don't regret the sale. I don't regret choosing myself when respect was missing, because that choice didn't end a relationship. It reset it. And sometimes that's the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the people who need to grow. The villa was sold, but something far more permanent was built in its place. A relationship that doesn't depend on power. A life that doesn't depend on appearances. And a future that no longer smells like poverty or pride but like balance. That's how it keeps going. Quietly. Steadily. Without needing to prove anything to anyone ever again. The balance didn't arrive all at once. Came in small confirmations. A phone call returned without delay. A conversation that didn't turn defensive. A decision made without needing approval from anyone else. Those things add up. My son started spending time with people who didn't care about his resume. People who argued ideas instead of admiring lifestyles. People who could disagree without trying to win. At first he found it uncomfortable. Then he found it grounding. One evening he told me something that surprised even him. I don't feel like I'm performing anymore, he said. I feel like I'm just living. That's when I knew the shift was permanent. Because performance is exhausting. Living is sustainable. He began measuring success differently. Not by how quickly things grew, but by how long they could last without costing him his peace. He left environments that rewarded arrogance and stayed in ones that valued accountability. Those choices didn't make headlines. They made him sleep better. I watched him learn restraint, not as limitation but as intelligence. He stopped buying things to signal arrival. He stopped talking about what he'd made it past. He started acknowledging what still supported him. That humility didn't make him smaller. It made him credible. As for me, I found myself enjoying anonymity, being just another person at the grocery store, another face at the cafe, another neighbor who waved and moved on. There's comfort in not being a symbol. I didn't want to be remembered as the woman who sacrificed everything. I wanted to be present as the woman who chose wisely eventually. There were moments, of course, when the past brushed up against the present. A comment from someone who didn't know the whole story. A memory triggered by a phrase or a smell. But those moments no longer hijacked my day. They passed. That's how I knew healing had settled into its proper place. Not erased, not dominating. One afternoon, my son asked if I'd ever want to buy another property. Something bigger. Something nice. I smiled. I already have something nice, I said. I wake up without dread. He nodded, understanding immediately. That's the kind of understanding you can't rush. Over time, he stopped needing reassurance that he was doing well. He trusted his own compass. And when he doubted it, he paused instead of pushing through. That pause saved him more than once. We never recreated the old dynamic. The imbalance was gone. Not because roles reversed, but because they equalized. We spoke as two adults who had both learned something costly. Respect became mutual, not owed. Sometimes I think about that moment in the villa, the insult, the dismissal, the casual cruelty. It no longer stings. It feels like a snapshot of someone who didn't yet know himself. People are allowed to outgrow their worst moments. They're just not allowed to avoid the consequences that lead them there. That's what made the lesson stick. Not the loss of luxury, not the shock, but the time it took to rebuild trust without shortcuts. The future now feels open in a way it never did before. Not because everything is possible, but because what's possible is aligned with who we actually are. And alignment is rare. The story doesn't need another twist. It doesn't need redemption arcs or grand gestures. It continues in small, durable ways. Shared meals, honest pauses, choices that don't require justification. The villa is gone. The illusion is gone. What remains is quieter and stronger. A relationship that survived the truth. A life that no longer confuses wealth with worth. And a peace that didn't come from owning more, but from finally owning ourselves. The peace stayed. Not the fragile kind that depends on everything going right, but the grounded kind that survives small disappointments, awkward moments, and ordinary stress. The kind that doesn't shatter the first time life raises its voice. My son began to understand that stability isn't boring. It's generous. It gives you room to make mistakes without panic. Room to change your mind without losing face. Room to admit you don't know everything, and don't need to. One evening, he called me after work, his voice lighter than it used to be. I said no today, he told me. To what? I asked. To something everyone expected me to want. He didn't sound proud. He sounded relieved. Relief is a sign you're listening to yourself. He started building his life in layers instead of leaps. Savings before splurges. Relationships before networking. Health before image. The world didn't collapse because of it. In fact, it expanded. People trusted him more. Not because he was impressive, but because he was predictable in the best way. He kept his word. He didn't disappear when things got uncomfortable. He stayed. Staying is harder than climbing. I learned that a long time ago. As for me, I found joy in routines I once rushed through. Cooking slowly. Walking without a destination. Letting days end without reviewing what I had accomplished. I stopped measuring my worth by productivity. I was allowed to exist without earning it. That realization was quiet but powerful. Sometimes neighbors would ask about my past, where I worked, what I used to do. I answered simply, no backstory, no drama, just facts. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing privacy. Privacy, I learned, is freedom without witnesses. My son noticed that too. He stopped oversharing, stopped explaining his choices to people who hadn't earned context. He learned that not everyone needs access to your reasoning. Boundaries don't close you off. They define where you begin. There came a day, months later, when we passed the old neighborhood where the villa once stood. Construction trucks lined the street. The property was being renovated for someone else. Bigger gates, higher walls, new owners. My son looked at it for a moment. Then he looked away. I don't miss it, he said, almost surprised. That was the final confirmation. When you don't miss what once defined you, you've moved on. We continued walking. The conversation drifted to ordinary things, weather, work, dinner plans. The moment passed without ceremony. And that's how I knew the story had finally settled into its true shape. Not as a lesson that needed repeating, not as a warning, not as a victory, but as a recalibration between love and respect, between ambition and gratitude, between who we were and who we chose to become. The villa was sold. The money served its purpose. But the real outcome couldn't be bought or taken away. A son who learned humility without losing confidence. A parent who reclaimed dignity without demanding repayment. A relationship no longer balanced on sacrifice alone. That's where it rests now. Not frozen. Not perfect. Just real. And sometimes real is the richest thing you can own. In the end, nothing dramatic happened. No final argument. No last apology that fixed everything. No grand speech about forgiveness. Life simply continued. And that was enough. My son stopped chasing places that impressed strangers. He stopped needing proof that he had escaped his past. He learned that dignity doesn't come from distance. It comes from acknowledgement. He never asked for the villa back. He never mentioned the insult again. Some words don't need to be revisited once they've done their work. What mattered was what replaced them. Respect showed up quietly. Consistency followed. And trust, slow, careful trust, returned without being demanded. As for me, I no longer carried the weight of what I had given up. The surgery receipt was no longer a symbol of sacrifice. It was just a fact, one decision among many that led us here. I didn't need gratitude spoken out loud every day. I didn't need repayment. I didn't need recognition. I needed peace. And I had it. One evening, as we sat together without talking much, my son said something simple that told me everything I needed to know. "I know where I come from now," he said. That was it. No guilt. No pride. Just understanding. The villa was gone. The illusion was gone. But something far more important remained. A relationship no longer built on fear or obligation. A life no longer shaped by silence or shame. And a future that didn't require pretending to be better than anyone else. People think stories like this end with loss. They don't. They end with alignment. Between who you are and how you live. Between love and respect. Between past and present. I didn't sell a house to punish my son. I sold it to save him from becoming someone he wouldn't recognize later. And in doing so, I saved myself too. That's the ending. Not revenge. Not regret. Just truth arriving quietly and staying.